Hello and welcome to Closing the Distance. My name is Jeff Myers, one of the pastors here at Roswell Presbyterian Church. I am here with our preacher from this past Sunday, Reverend Ryan Jensen. Ryan, how you doing?
Doing great.
Drinking that coffee?
It's good for you.
Indeed. Well,
no cream, no sugar.
Just straight caffeine, baby. So the ironies of our conversation about your sermon on Sunday are many and deep, and we're going to explore some of them. You talked about in technology we trust, based on this passage on the Tower of Babel. A great text. Were you kind of surprised to have those two matched up?
Yeah, first, and for the listeners out there, Jeff assigns the scripture and the topic, and I would imagine that pastors are free to lobby for another scripture reference. But at first, I was like, how do those link up together? But it worked out.
Good. Well, I'm glad you had a lot of great stuff to say. I got to tell you, so I listened to it again on the podcast that we have, and the funny thing was I was in the car listening to it. So let's think about all the technology involved in me listening to it on the podcast. You recorded it through a sound system, through a board, through a computer. It goes up through YouTube. Then takes 3 hours to download on a computer. Then it goes through the editing process on a computer, a bunch of sound programs. Then it's uploaded to the podcast feed that we do through Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And then I am in the car listening to it on my phone, which is connected via Bluetooth to the car audio system. And then it comes to my ears. And the amount of technology that made that possible was really remarkable. But the funniest thing is when technology gets in the way of me listening to it. So I was listening to it. I have an Apple iPhone, and I'm listening to it. And you begin to talk about the voice automated program on Apple phones called Siri. And you said, "Hey, Siri." And every time you said, "Hey, Siri," Siri on my phone came up, and it stopped the podcast and it said, "Can I help you?" And then when it does that, it goes back to the podcast, but it automatically rewinds 5 to 10 seconds. So you don't miss anything. Then you said, "Hey, Siri" again. And then it got me in this loop of it going, "Hey, Siri," pausing. I was like, how do I continue to listen to the sermon?
Yeah, I thought there was a possibility that when I said that, everybody's phones, with an iPhone anyway, would have just woken up. And when you said it, my laptop just then fired up. It's like, huh?
It was cracking me up. I was like, oh, and I thought this is kind of like a metaphor for what you were kind of preaching about, that technology is great in some ways, but it also can be a great hindrance in other ways.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you gave a lot of great examples of how it gets in the way. What are some ways that you think are helpful to discern how it gets in the way, and then to kind of transcend those and make decisions about how to set technology aside?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're on Instagram Reels or Twitter or Blue, what's the new one?
Blue Ivy? No, that's
whatever that one is. I mean, if you're going through those and just thoughtlessly, that would be, I think, an addiction to the phone.
Yeah. I mean,
but if you're using it for communication, well, here's one. Laura will see me on the phone, and she said, "You need to get off your phone." I said, "I'm reading the news." She said, "No, you're not. You're on your phone." I said, "No, the news is on the phone. We don't get the Atlanta Journal-Constitution dropped off. We don't have, whatever else. This is it. Like, I have a subscription to the New York Times. I can read stories on the phone, but she always has her doubts."
Yes, well, our loved ones care about our well-being and they want our attention.
Well, you know, there's a big difference between, you know, this, a big paper, and just doing that action.
Yeah, and I think like we can kind of fetishize like old stuff. But old stuff used to be new stuff back in the day.
Yeah.
And our new stuff today will one day be old stuff. I think I loved your story about selling fireworks and the Shaquille Shaquille O'Neal sized shoebox of a cell phone. I thought that was really really well done. Um, how how do we like how do we know how to deal with this kind of technology? Um, and yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's where I had to kind of, I had two sermons worth of information,
Right.
which is interesting because I think when we start out as preachers, it's difficult to like fill out the full sermon, and then years go by, and you're like, no, I've really got to like shorten this thing down, because that was kind of where my mind was going. Is like just how far we've come in 10 years is incredible when you think about it. So 10 years from now, artificial intelligence is going to be making a lot of decisions for us.
Yes. And so
And
what do you think about
well, there's
that?
like another, yeah, I was thinking about the Terminator came out in 1984, and it predicted a future in which artificial intelligence took over, and it neither wanted nor needed humankind. So it was trying to do away with humankind. And in 1984, that was such a science fiction fantasy kind of thing. But now you're like, oh, I could see that happening. And the future they envisioned was in 2029, four
We got
years away.
4 years. Yeah, I think like so somebody I don't know if people ask you this as a preacher, but people occasionally be like, "Well, is AI going to start writing your sermons?"
It could.
And I know people that use it to write sermons and as assistants. I haven't used it, but like my wife laughed. She was like, she knows I love writing sermons. It's something I enjoy about this job, and I do not want to farm out the things I enjoy to
Yeah.
AI. It's like, and she made a great point. She was like, "No, we want AI to like empty the dishwasher or like, like
Well,
take out
cure
the
cancer. I
garbage."
mean, that's the ultimate hope.
You know, it's it's like I don't want you write my sermon. I don't want you having a conversation with Ryan right now. I want to do that. That's what I enjoy.
Well, I've thought about that because if you just gave like a dry sermon that was filled with statistics and facts and things that could be easily resourced from the computer, people might wonder. But I think that's where like the personal stories have to come in. I heard this through the lens of a comedian. They were talking about like the first iteration of AI, that it would come up with a joke, but the joke didn't make sense or it was just bad.
Uh-huh.
But they said, a couple of versions later, it's writing better jokes than they could actually come up with.
Oh,
So when you
interesting.
see a comedian on stage, they might be using that too.
Yeah, man. It's a wild world that especially our children are going to grow up in.
Well, it can be scary too because you can ask AI to produce a video with ex politician saying Y statement, and we're probably a year or two away from that being just a easy thing to do.
So what like how how do we discern what's true and what's false and fake? What how do we make sense of it?
I think that's where the human connections come into play because when the cell phone or the computer or the tablet is replacing the conversations that we have with each other face to face, then you can get lost,
Mhm.
especially if you're on a computer to a great deal. Say you're on YouTube. YouTube kind of learns your preferences. It learns what stories you gravitate toward, what you're afraid of, and it just caters more and more and more of that to you.
Yeah, I liked what you said about confirmation bias, and that oftentimes the algorithms just show us more of what we've already seen and support what we already think.
Mhm.
What and I think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing the stratification, in politics, in culture. Um, you it's so binary. It's either or.
Right.
Yes or no.
Nuance become lost.
Yes. Do you have any strategies that you use to kind of get to complexify what you're reading, what you're paying attention to, your news intake?
Huh. Um, that's tricky
So
because
some
it really doesn't matter what it is. I mean, Google has that ability to understand what you like. Somebody, and this was years ago, somebody gave the example of, one person could type in Egypt and it would be come see ancient Egypt and tour the pyramids and so on and so forth. Whereas another person would Google Egypt and it would be, full of terrorism and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah,
And that's just a simple
so
Google search.
so one of the things I try to do is I have several different sources for my news, and they don't all align with where maybe I am ideologically. And so I try to challenge myself. I try to read folks who I know I'm not always going to agree with. And I try to do that in a way to say, okay, how can I learn and challenge my own views and have better, I think, views because I've looked at more opinions and data, and then I'm able to sift through and come to better beliefs, hopefully. But also, I do that to say, what do other people think? What are other people reading? In a congregation of 2,500 folks, we have people across the ideological spectrum, and I think it's important to know what our people are consuming and what they're thinking.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there used to be this like common sense moderate middle, and that's where the news was. So if you read it, it might have a slant on it, but not to a great degree. They would try to be objective, but that is since like that place is gone and everything's just going this way. So I feel like whatever news piece you're going to read is going to be heavily favored to the left or right.
Yeah. I I've yeah, I try to listen to some podcasts when I'm not listening to sports podcasts.
I've got a
The
few of those.
ideology of the NBA. Should guys be shooting so many threes?
Yes, you just got to make them.
The good point. Um, and I try to, yeah, challenge and read folks, and I try to find people who are also trying to think through their positions, other ideas, and they're not um, just retreating to what they've always thought, and that they are also consuming various viewpoints, and they do justice to those viewpoints in making arguments and coming up with beliefs.
Well, I think we've lost the ability to disagree with one another or to address confrontation in a constructive way. And an example of that is yesterday I had a call from the Norcross police, and they actually came to our house. My mother-in-law was there at the time. And they said, you have a neighbor behind you who's complaining about your light, our floodlight in the backyard. So it's not in our little 70 neighborhood place, but these homes behind it. And I told the police officer, I said, how about you just give them my number and we can address this, one-on-one and figure it out. And he said, well, I can't do that because this person doesn't want he said, people nowadays don't like confrontation.
Mm.
I said, well, I don't view it as confrontation. I view it as, solving the problem. But Kind
Interesting.
of case in point.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, okay. So speaking of confrontation, I want to pivot a little bit from technology and get to the family. I'm going to be talking about the family this Sunday, and you referenced, and your children are a little older than mine,
Yeah.
so I need some wisdom. I need some advice. I mean, you used a couple anecdotes referencing your children. Were they okay with? Were they paying attention? Did they hear their names mentioned? Were they okay with it? And how do you navigate that for content for a sermon?
So when I got home, Laura said, Camille, she's 13. She said, how about just giving her a heads up that you're going to talk about her in the sermon?
What'd you say?
Knox, I think I made eye contact with him when I was talking about, what I did with him. And I'm pretty sure he heard me, but he's not going to be one to, speak up too fast. So I think Laura and I agreed it's not necessarily a ask permission, but just don't be surprised because I'm going to tell the story that has your name in it. But what I did with Laura was not scripted. It just kind of occurred to me, and I said out loud, when I get home, Laura's going to call my bluff. She's gonna hold me accountable for all these things I'm saying about cell phones.
Yes, the loves of our life making us better people.
Yeah, and actually yesterday she said you literally preached about that. I said I know, but I'm reading the news.
But I'm reading the news.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, that's helpful. So I gotta just make sure my kids know that I'm going to reference them in a sermon, and then I'm good to go.
Yeah, I think right now they're young enough where you can, throw them out there. But with Courtney, it may be another get her vote. That's what
Yeah.
I would do.
It probably just depends on what kind of a story it is, and who's the hero and who's the villain. And let me
The
say,
wife is always the hero.
that's right. That's right. All right. So, okay, Ryan, why don't you talk a little bit? I don't know if folks know the congregational care, all that goes into congregational care. What is some of the stuff you're up to in your ministry area now?
Past few months, we deliver home communion the first Sunday of every month, or that week anyway. We try to
Okay,
get it out the first week.
pause right there. So you referenced this in the sermon, at home. Who receives at home communion?
Typically, people who cannot come to worship. So we have a lot of homebound members. We have a lot of people in assisted living, different places like that. So because they can't come here, we take it to them.
Okay. And
So we
who's
stay
we?
connected through communion.
And who takes it to them?
Uh, One pastor and one elder,
And how often do you do it?
unless it's a large care facility, and then it's typically 2 or 3 elders and a pastor, because there we actually have a kind of a homily or a message accompanied by communion to the group.
And when you say a large care facility, what is that?
Like Brookdale, we've got a lot of people who are in assisted living there, even memory care, and they'll bring in everybody that they can. And so we might have 15, 20, 25 people gathered. And it's usually pretty cool because in a setting like that, you can have a conversational sermon.
Yes.
So this is kind of a back and forth.
Mm-hmm. What other stuff do you do in congregational care?
So another big one is lay parish visitors. And there's some overlap with at-home communion, but it's a larger, kind of a different group of people. It could be people that are in Presbyterian Village in Austell, or all the way down to Athens and everywhere in between, where people who can't come to worship, we keep those connections alive by visiting, and at a minimum, phone calls or a note. But like the note writing section is its own effort. So there's like a whole separate department devoted to that.
Right. Okay. If I have a loved one who I think, who needs congregational care, how do I get help and get care?
Well, I think kind of trying to find the fit because we also have Stephen Ministry, and Stephen Ministers they go through a pretty extensive training to have those one-on-one connections that are very confidential at the same time. And Stephen Ministers are not there to fix or to heal, because we say that God provides the healing, but to walk beside someone through a time of difficulty. So that's one way. But lay parish visitors or at-home communion, I would be the best point person to get that going.
Okay, and let's say I have somebody. Oh, go ahead.
Well, new initiative, and I have to say it out loud, especially where people can hear it, because it holds me accountable. A newsletter that will go out to 75 plus for people for whom technology is not necessarily an easy thing to do. And some people simply don't have computers either.
Right. Okay. And when you say 75 plus, you mean people who are 75 years or older.
Right.
Okay. You know, some people might 75, people who run, over 7 miles an hour or something.
I've learned there are RC cars that go 70 miles an hour.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Well, and I'd also highlight for folks, we do have a prayer list. If you would like prayer, you can get on the prayer list. If you have a pastoral emergency on the church website, I don't have the number memorized, but you go to the church website, call the emergency phone, a pastor will respond, either answer or respond to your call. We're always here. If you want to come in and talk and chat, we do this all the time, and we are available for folks in need. And so I want to highlight that, especially Ryan, since that's much of your ministry.
Yeah, between Scott Weimer and myself, we try to make those hospitals like the priority. So if someone's in the hospital, we'll be there that same day or at least the day after in most cases.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Ryan, for closing the distance today. Thank you for your message on technology. I'll be preaching on In Family We Trust. So if you feel like you're let down because you don't have the perfect family, maybe there might be good news for you on Sunday.
That sounds like a much more difficult topic than technology.
Nah, dude, technology was a tough one, man. You did a great job. I really appreciated it. And I do want to say it was really it was lighthearted and fun without being silly. And I think you did a really great job of, because we all find ourselves, down like a wormhole with Instagram and stuff. And we're like, why did I just waste 25 minutes of my life on 30-second clips of like babies eating popsicles or whatever, just like
it's easy to do.
So I think you gave a great message, a call to arms, to wake up and to take responsibility for our use of technology. So thank you, Ryan. Thanks for closing the distance, and I'll see you soon. All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, brother. Bye-bye.